This is a man's world. This is a man's world. But it wouldn't be nothing, nothing without a woman or a girl.
Welcome to another episode of It's a Man's World, the Genesis 3:16 Effect. I am your host, Haley Rose, curriculum developer at the Anastasis Center for Christian Education and Ministry, where our mission is to proclaim the restorative justice of God and the healing atonement of Jesus. If you are enjoying our content, please remember to like and subscribe and follow the link in the description to check out our website. I am joined once again by Rachel Darnell, our voice of expertise in the intersection of theology and women's issues. Hi, Rachel.
Hi, Haley. It's so good to be here again.
Rachel, where did we leave off and where are we going now?
Sure. Last episode, we were talking about women in education, and we did not use the term male gaze in that episode, but we certainly could have because patriarchal education grooms girls to appeal to the male gaze, whether that is literal by teaching them how to dress in feminine, attractive ways, or whether that's figurative, teaching them to develop only the skills and knowledge that would equip them to serve and please their future husband. Today, we're talking about another topic that connects with the male gaze, and that is the topic of clothing. And clothing is probably a bigger topic than it deserves to be in women's Christian literature. But we do want to give it this whole episode today because it has been so mishandled throughout history. And we want to kind of come in and set the record straight and hopefully undo some of that damage.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, we're not here to be the modesty police. We are not going to tell you, you can't wear this, you have to wear that. That's not helpful. We got enough of that, right? Instead, we're asking, what are clothes for? Right? What are they for? And also, animals don't wear clothes, guinea pigs don't wear clothes, deer don't wear clothes walking outside. Why do we wear clothes?
Right. The first time that we come across this topic in the Bible is, of course, in the Garden of Eden. We are told that Adam and Eve were naked in the garden and they were unashamed. It was not a problem that they didn't have clothes. After they disobey God's command and they eat from the tree, it's then that they have this revelation that, oh, we are naked, and they try to cover themselves with fig leaves, which doesn't work very well. And God makes them clothes of skin that are a little bit more adequate for them. The first time that we see this topic in the Bible is, of course, in the Garden of Eden, where we are told that Adam and Eve were naked, but they were not ashamed. So they didn't have clothes, but that was not a problem until they ate from the tree and they experienced that shame of nakedness for the first time. And they try to cover their bodies up using fig leaves.
Well, that makes me think I think every little kid has thought, so if we didn't sin, we'd all be naked, right? That's a logical
Right.
question. Is that true?
I think not. This is my personal opinion, but what I believe is that I think Adam and Eve's relationship between each other and with God was so intimate that clothing was not relevant to their lives at that point. I think once they started having children and started having families, clothing probably would have become a part of human culture because
Mm.
clothing in the Bible is about honoring our created nature as private beings.
Mm. Yeah, and privacy is not just about clothing. We have public thoughts, speech. We can choose to speak our thoughts out loud. And then we have private thoughts. You can choose not to speak your thoughts out loud and just think what you're thinking, and no one knows what you're thinking, right? Your home has a public part and a private part, and those are distinct from each other. Marriage has a public face. You have a wedding ceremony, you build a family, you put your pictures up on Instagram, you operate out in the world, you're going to Costco, you're buying things, but you have a private part as well. You have sex, you have emotional intimacy in marriage, and that's not for the rest of the world to share. And so when you have privacy, what that means is you are now set up to have real intimacy. You choose who you let into the private parts of your life.
Yeah. And it's connected with human dignity. And I say
Mhm.
that carefully because I do not want to give the impression that the fact that it's connected with human dignity means that it's contingent, that you don't have dignity unless you're covered up enough. But the reason why it's connected to human dignity is because it's part of being made in the image of a hidden God. So,
Mm.
one of God's attributes is his hiddenness, and that means that God cannot be exposed by an act of human will. He reveals himself when he wants to, where he wants to, how he wants to, and to whom he wants to.
Yeah. And we see in the Bible that God has the right to show himself or to hide himself. In Deuteronomy 31:18, he says, "And I will surely hide my face in that day because of all the evil which they have done, in that they have turned to other gods." And then in Numbers 6:24 through 26, he says, "The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace." So God has boundaries. And because God has boundaries, that means that we, as the bearers of his image, are absolutely entitled to set boundaries around our privacy as well.
Absolutely. And it's just important to reinforce that the human body has dignity because of what it is. And there's nothing that can take that away. There is nothing in the Bible to suggest that our dignity goes up or down depending on what we are wearing. The biblical concept of modesty is actually tied less to how much you're covered up and more to being sensitive to class inequalities, which is, I think, something that we have just totally lost in the modesty discourse today.
Mm.
First Timothy 2:9, for instance, says that it is immodest to wear expensive fabrics and ornaments and hairstyles that would require having a servant to do it for you because it's literally so ornate that you can't do it yourself.
Mm. We have projected some extremely contemporary, first world, in the modern world problems onto biblical texts on modesty. If you are standing, as I am, right, in front of your full closet, trying to decide what to wear, as I do, that is something that is only possible because of modern manufacturing and a global marketplace. I assure you, the clothes on my back did not come from the United States of America. I don't even have to look, and neither do you. So, as modern
Absolutely not.
people, yeah, we're all wearing clothes from somewhere else. That is not how it always was. Modern people that we are today, you watching this and me right now, I think we need to have a refresher on how involved it used to be, and it still is, to make clothing.
So, for most of history, making clothes has been extremely time consuming. It was a multi step process that would vary from culture to culture. But basically, there are going to be these 5 steps. The first step is gathering your fibers, and that's going to be either wool or flax or maybe cotton. Step 2 is taking those fibers and carding them. And the process of carding just makes the fibers all go the same way. And that prepares them for step 3, which is spinning the carded fibers into thread using either a weighted spindle or later a spinning wheel. And you're not done after that. You go on to step 4, which is taking that thread to a loom and weaving it into fabric. And depending on what kind of a garment you're making, you might be done at that point. But if you're making any kind of a tailored garment, you then have to take that fabric, cut it, and sew the fabric into a finished garment. So it was a very involved process until really the Industrial Revolution mechanized a lot of that work. But that did not start to happen until the 1820s with the power loom and textile production being moved to factories. The sewing machine is something that we take for granted, but it was not really available until 1851 when Isaac Singer released the first Singer sewing machine. Synthetic fabrics, which is what most of us wear. I'm sure I'm wearing synthetic fabrics right now, but those were not available until the Second World War, and really not until after the Second World War because those products were heavily rationed. Textile production did not shift overseas until the 70s when the US started putting more regulations on textile manufacturing. And so all of these manufacturers moved their production overseas. And that's where we get the world that we live in now, where we're using cheap foreign labor. And that creates this world with fast fashion where you can go buy a t shirt for $5, wear it one time, throw it away, and that produces all kinds of problems, especially textile waste. The EPA has reported that America, just America alone, produces 16 to 17 million tons of textile waste every year.
Mm. And whether you're a really adventurous dresser or you're really all about the modesty, our modern attitudes about clothing really are only possible because of that industrialized global economy that we live in. Excessive fabric has been a status symbol, and now we add to that we display our wealth by having a large wardrobe. You don't wear it all at once, but you're wearing lots of different kinds of clothing, right? And you've got this variety of brand name clothing. And even if you're not super wealthy, well, you can mimic that by buying off-brand imitations of high-end fashion, and you don't want to be seen wearing the same outfit twice. Today, our modern modesty culture is not that much different from the ultra stylish girlies. If you've seen modesty influencers on TikTok or Instagram, there are women of all different faith traditions: Catholic, evangelical, Pentecostal, Mormon, Muslim, Jewish, Eastern Orthodox. They're using social media to teach their followers how to be fashionable without showing too much skin, but you're still using all of that fabric that is built
Yeah.
under questionable conditions and is going to waste.
Right. There's still that overconsumption problem in Modesty
Mhm,
Talk. To research for this episode, I did spend some time on Modesty Talk just to see, what's going on in that scene.
mhm.
And here is what I found. First of all, modesty brands can be pretty expensive, which is not necessarily a bad thing. Hopefully, they're expensive because they're using good materials and ethical labor, hopefully. But the content requires variety, which means instead of buying, one outfit that's going to last you a long time and you're not going to need to have a lot of clothes, you have to keep on mixing it up so that you have more content to put out. And that really adds up, and you're consuming a lot more than you really need. And to illustrate that, there's a trend on Modesty Talk called the closet clean out. And these influencers will make videos where they're going through their closet and discarding items that they consider to be immodest, that they might have bought just 6 months ago. And now they've decided, oh, that's not modest. And that approach is just unthinkable. It would have been unthinkable in the ancient world. You did not throw away clothes. You couldn't, because they were so labor intensive to produce. But not to mention that it just goes against the whole spirit of biblical modesty to publicize how modest you're being and like make it your entire brand.
Yeah, it's not modest to post a video of yourself, #modest. It's like posting a video and being like, #humble. No, you're not, and you're not
Yeah.
fooling us.
Yeah, it's kind of an oxymoron.
Mhm.
Um, And I think we're also in our modern world very distanced from the idea of poverty equating nakedness. And
Mm.
that was a reality in the ancient world. Today, even if you're very low income, you're going to be able to go to Goodwill and get something to wear. There's just so many clothes on our market that are extremely cheap. People are just throwing them away. So you're not going to have to worry about that in today's world. But there was a time when if you were poor, you were not guaranteed to have anything to wear at all.
This is in the Bible, and we're so far away from that now. But remember, Matthew 25, Jesus says that whatever his followers have done for the least of my brothers and sisters, they've really done for him. And one of the things that he says is, I was naked and you gave me clothing. James 2:15. If a brother or sister is naked and lacks daily food, and one of you says to them, go in peace, keep warm and eat your fill, and yet you don't supply their bodily needs, what good is that? And then Luke 3:11, whoever has two coats must share with anyone who has none. This is biblical.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's not, something that the authors of the Bible are coming up with just for dramatic effect.
Mhm.
Many people in the early church were poor, and clearly many of them had nothing to wear at all, or at least not adequate clothing. And that's where you start to understand where biblical modesty is coming from, because it was not really appropriate for wealthy Christian women to show up to the church gathering wearing these expensive clothes and jewelry when on the other side of the room you have brothers and sisters in Christ who are going without basic necessities. So in First Timothy 2, when Paul encourages women to clothe themselves instead in good works,
Mm,
um, he probably had in mind that they might make clothes for the poor, because
mm.
even wealthy women did learn how to weave, and that was something that they could have done for charity rather than spending all their time, money, and energy just beautifying themselves at great cost.
Yeah. Clothing the naked who have not enough money to clothe themselves. This is a beautiful picture of restoring dignity to someone because it is embarrassing to be naked. That's why people have nightmares about being naked in public.
Right. And you hear people talk about, oh, these girls these days, they walk around half naked. Like, no, nobody wants
Mm,
to be naked.
no
That's a
one does
pretty
that.
universal thing.
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
Bible treats it that way. When the Bible talks about public nakedness, it's almost never talking about flaunting your body to get sexual attention. It's about loss of power and loss of basic human dignity. The themes of clothing and nakedness are all over the prophets, and it's almost always in connection with wealth and poverty, just like we have seen in the New Testament. So, for instance, in Isaiah 3 6 through 26, there's this section where Isaiah is rebuking the daughters of Jerusalem for their clothing, but it's specifically because their wealth has come from these predatory business practices that took advantage of the poor and the vulnerable. He literally says, the spoil of the poor is in your houses, in verse 14. Or in Amos 2 6, it says, they sell the righteous for silver and the needy for a pair of sandals. They lay themselves down beside every altar on garments taken in pledge. So garments taken in pledge there would mean a guarantee for a loan. So if you loan somebody some money, you say, you need to give me something of yours that's valuable so I know that you're going to pay me back. And a poor person often had nothing to offer as a guarantee except for the literal clothes on their back. Um, so these predatory lenders were literally accepting somebody's clothes and letting them go naked so that they would know they're going to get their money back. And if I don't, hey, at least I have another outfit to wear. And then selling the poor would refer to probably selling debt slaves as human chattel.
Selling them for a pair of sandals. caring more about a new pair of shoes than another human being.
Yeah, it's really quite shocking. And when you understand the exploitative dynamic behind those flashy clothes, it's a lot easier to understand where the prophets are coming from when they criticize women for how they're dressing. And it's a lot easier to understand texts like Lamentations 1:8 that says, "All who honor Jerusalem despise her, for they have seen her nakedness." And this is not God being vindictive or trying to just humiliate Jerusalem for the sake of it. It's God allowing his people to experience the humiliation that they have just casually inflicted on the poor time and time again. In the prophet's public exposure is also associated with captivity. Clothing was such a valuable commodity that when an army would invade a city and take spoils of war, it was standard procedure to take the clothes of the captive survivors. So, captives of war would often as not be taken as slaves, and either they would be clothed in very cheap material like sackcloth, which was not intended for clothing, or they would just not have anything to wear at all.
Mm. This is not the last time that enslaved people have had to experience nakedness. Writing about our slave auctions in the American South, Isabel Wilkerson says in Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent. Women were forced to disrobe before the crowd, to submit to hours of physical probing by roughhousing men who examined their teeth, their hands, or whatever other parts of their bodies the potential bidders decided to inspect.
It's so humiliating. It's such a visceral picture
Mm,
of disempowerment
mhm,
to have that happen to you. But more positively, in the Bible, clothing is also associated with personal power and restoration of dignity. So, for instance, in the parable of the prodigal son, the father, when the son returns home, the first thing he does is to dress him in his best robe and in a pair of sandals and put his ring on his finger. And this would have communicated to the original audience that the son has been fully restored to his position of sonship with all of the household authority that that would have implied.
mm. So it's such a paradigm shift, although it should not be, to notice that the Bible talks about clothing in a way that is affirming human dignity. That's what clothing is about, human dignity. But today, when people are talking about the Bible and the clothing in one sentence, the conversation becomes about women's clothing, shaming women. As always, we need to figure that one out, right?
hmm And we need to talk about how we got here because there is
Mm,
a story to how we got here. Just like us, the early church lived in a culture, and the culture they lived in kind of had two main influences. And the first was imperial Rome, and the second was Jewish tradition. So these are the two influences that, besides the New Testament itself, are feeding into what the early church thinks about clothing and sex and women. So let's talk about Rome first. Clothing in Rome was the primary way that women signaled whether they were sexually respectable or whether they were sexually available. And there wasn't really much in between. Respectable women would wear a veil that covered their hair, and that signaled that they had a father or a husband or brothers who would take a man to court if he seduced or raped her. Most Roman women could not actually take direct legal action themselves, so they had to rely on a male guardian to do that for them.
oh, I find that insulting today.
Yeah, I do too. But if you put that in perspective, at least they did have
Mm,
a legal guardian to
mm,
protect them and or pursue justice for them in that instance.
mhm, mhm.
Other women did not.
Mm,
Enslaved women were actually prohibited from wearing the veil by Roman sumptuary laws. And
mm,
the sumptuary laws were ostensibly about like curbing luxury, but what it was really about was visually reinforcing the caste system.
mhm,
An enslaved woman who wore a veil was considered to be getting above her station,
mm.
and she could actually face very harsh penalties for that. So when a woman went out with her head bare, it signaled to everyone around her that she was without a legal protector. So she had no real legal power to say no to a man's sexual advances.
That is an extremely convenient system for sexual predators, right?
Right? Hmm.
Yeah. And it sounds like modesty was not actually an option for some women in ancient Rome, just like it was not an option for enslaved Black women in the American South.
Absolutely.
So, all right, what about traditional Jewish culture?
So there are a lot of positive things. There were and still are a lot of positive things about the Jewish concept of modesty because it is more biblically informed. Jewish modesty is about having discretion, which means being able to discern what ought to be kept private and keeping it that way. In Jewish thought, being discreet applies to bodies, but it also applies to everything else. So, a discreet person is someone who can be trusted not to expose confidential information or embarrassing information about somebody else. And they're not going to expose private parts of their own lives in ways that would make other people uncomfortable.
Okay, that sounds really positive. That sounds healthy, right?
Right, it is. That part of it is. But
Uh-oh.
Jewish tradition also drew from an apocryphal text called the Book of Enoch, which
Mm,
um, re narrates the events of the pre flood world. And this book is not considered canon by Christians or by Jews today. Um, but it still had a lot of influence on Jewish culture and through that on early Christian culture. So the book of Enoch says that the fallen angels, those angels that are referred to as Nephilim sometimes, corrupted mankind by teaching the men about the art of war and teaching the women how to make jewelry and cosmetics so that they could trick and seduce men.
mm. Okay, I've got this. So, wearing a little lipstick and a little eyeshadow. This is the same thing as threatening somebody with an instrument of war. This sounds it's giving Cartman drama triangle. Recall our previous episode on that, right? It's kind of giving
Absolutely.
that. So
Yeah.
for playing devil's advocate, women do use their beauty to destroy men. In Proverbs 7, there's an adulterous woman. She seduces foolish men to their deaths. She's dressed like a prostitute. She's out in the public square instead of at home where she belongs. She's not being modest, right?
Let's take a closer look at Proverbs 7.
Good.
This text is not a cautionary tale written to women who dress provocatively. Um, for one thing, Proverbs is not written to women. The original audience was supposed to be young men, so it can't be written to women who dress provocatively because it's to a male audience. Lady Folly is kind of a traditional name for the adulterous woman in Proverbs who shows up multiple times. She's a recurring character in Proverbs. And she is a metaphor that is directed at young men, and she stands for spiritual infidelity. And Lady Folly's true weapon of mass destruction, as it were, of young men is not her makeup, it's not her skimpy clothes or attire of a harlot. Her true weapon is flattery. She is also countered by Lady Wisdom, who can also be found in the public square. She is using her voice to call out to young men, and she's presented as an attractive romantic partner for young men. Long story short, if you're interpreting Proverbs 7 into a modesty sermon for girls and women, you are definitely missing the point.
So we did hit on Tertullian in episode 2. He's the guy who wants women to dress modestly out of their sense of shame from the fall, right?
Yeah, we went through some of those quotes in episode 2, and I do think that Tertullian has fully earned his reputation for misogyny, but I do want to hit on some ways that On the Apparel of Woman is actually countercultural in his context and countercultural in our context as well. And I want to point that out not because I'm interested in renovating Tertullian's image, but to demonstrate that modesty has not meant the same thing in every time and place. It's not a universal, timeless set of principles. So Tertullian's view of modesty was very informed by the Book of Enoch. He actually quotes from it directly. So he considered beautification techniques like makeup and hair dye to be deceitful and to be crimes against nature. Even to dye fabric a different color than like the sheep that it came from is deceitful and against nature. He also did not have a high view of sex. Christian men, he thought, should be content to have wives that were chaste, and they should not expect them to satisfy some arbitrary cultural beauty standard.
So in some ways, Tertullian, he's got some countercultural stuff that would not really fly today. Our clothes are dyed. Sorry, Tertullian. We're out here dyeing our clothes. Like, I'm so
And we're
sorry.
not going to stop.
I'm also not sorry about it. Yeah. And Christian women are often told, men are visual. They're so visual. So don't let yourself go. Come on, right? That's a big message for Christian women.
Right. And whereas Tertullian is to the degree where he is like, I'm almost quoting him, men only care about one thing, and it's chastity. Like that is he's like, if you're a real Christian man, you don't care what your wife looks like at all. Now, to his credit, Tertullian is a lot more in touch with New Testament concerns about the poor and the vulnerable. For
Mm,
instance, he objects to women wearing jewelry with gold or silver or gems because a lot of those were produced through penal labor. So he thought it was inappropriate to wear these gaudy pieces of jewelry that had been made by people who were captive.
mm. And that's relevant today. That's so relevant today. It's more relevant today with the textile industry being as corrupt and abhorrent as it is, and yet we all still have to wear clothes. I'm wearing clothes that are not ethical. We likely all are. We know. Shout out to like the millennials killed the diamond industry. That's still a thing today. Like, good that it died. It didn't die though. Like, that's a thing. Totally a thing. But what you don't hear is Christian modesty influencers really concerned about the actual concerns about the shirt on my back, which is the unethical labor practices and penal labor, mining of materials, damage to the planet. They're not worried about that at all.
Right. Yeah, it's just not even on the radar
Yeah.
for most people who talk about modesty today. Now,
Mm,
one thing that people do talk about when they're discussing modesty today is how much skin you're showing. And that is something that Tertullian actually never brings up.
mm,
That's not on his radar because that was not an issue in the ancient world when
mhm.
wearing multiple layers of clothing every time that you go out was a sign of wealth and luxury. And wearing less clothing usually didn't indicate that you were trying to be a skank. It indicated that you were poor and couldn't
Right,
afford anything else.
right.
But, and there's always a but, Tertullian does introduce his Christian audience to this idea that it's a woman's responsibility to keep men from lusting. He says that instead of spending hours and hours beautifying yourself, you should actually put that same time and energy into diminishing your beauty so that you don't disturb men's purity by, quote, presenting a stumbling block to it.
Oh, a stumbling block. That's where it came from.
That's,
Well,
mm-hmm.
yeah. Oh, Tertullian. He would hate me with my lipstick on right now and my picked out clothing and accessories. So he thought that I would not be being modest because I'm not purposefully being ugly. I'm purposefully being pretty. Uh, sorry, not sorry, Tertullian. I will not be doing that. But how did we get from there having an entire industry around trying to be modest, but also stylish?
So, this all has to do with changing attitudes about sex and marriage, especially during the Reformation. So, medieval society leading up to the Reformation and during it, they had something called the three estates. And the first estate was those who pray, which is the clergy. The second estate was those who rule, which is the nobility. And the third estate was those who work, so peasants or commoners. And there were certainly plenty of devout nobles and devout commoners, but the three estates concept kind of lent itself to this idea that being holy was the clergy's job, and that applied to modesty as well. So, monks and nuns certainly practice a very similar modesty philosophy to Tertullian's. Um, they were supposed to be lifelong celibates and they would dress very plainly, even purposely disfiguring themselves, like the monk's tonsure, that hairstyle that they have that's bald in the middle. That was purposely to be ugly. And that was seen as being appropriate to their role as those who pray, those who devote their lives to this celibate lifestyle. Now, a noblewoman's role was very different because her job was to marry advantageously, to please her husband, and to have as many children as she could. And the way that this would play out with her dress is that opulent styles would advertise her wealth and her beauty to potential partners. And that was seen as being appropriate to her role because she really had no other job than to get married and have kids. Now, peasant women just dressed cheaply and practically because they were doing a lot of manual labor, and because, just like in Rome, medieval England had sumptuary laws, and they regulated the clothing of the peasants so that they couldn't look too much like a noble.
Mm, don't love that. So, how did things change after the Reformation?
So it certainly varied. You have the Puritans, and I think we all have that picture in our head of the way that a Puritan looks. They were all about rejecting the pomp and the luxury that was associated with the Catholic Church. So both women and men in Puritan communities would wear a very distinctive, almost uniform that was purposely plain and drab. However, the Puritans were definitely a religious minority at the time. So it's kind of like when we see an Amish person or a Mennonite person or any other like plainclothes tradition here. It's not what you think of as being like, oh, everybody dresses like that. Mainstream Protestantism eventually settled into this much more relaxed standard of female modesty that idealized class consciousness. So you were supposed to still be careful not to dress above your station, and sexual innocence. Basically, the idea was you still want to attract a marriage partner, but you want to do it without appearing too worldly or too sexually aggressive. And a good example of this is a 1765 text called Fordyce's Sermons to Young Women. And if you have read or watched Pride and Prejudice, you will remember that this is one of Mr. Collins' favorite books.
I love that we have unlocked Mr. Collins finally. Episode 7, Mr. Collins is unlocked. Love it.
Yes. So you can see how much has changed in some of these quotes from James Fordyce. For instance, here's a quote. He says,
"That works of ingenuity and elegance are particularly becoming in your sex, and that the study of them ought to enter into female education as much as possible. All, I think, are agreed. Women may avail themselves of every decent attraction that can lead to a state for which they were manifestly formed."
i.e., marriage.
Yes, this is modesty talk, of which I'm sure Mr. Collins is their patron saint, right? There's a lot of fabric, but guess what? This is all about the male gaze.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fordyce is definitely an advocate of that idea that modest is hottest.
Oh, we've unlocked a new thing. Modest
We've
is
unlocked
hottest.
modest is hottest.
Yes.
So he says,
When you show a sweet solicitude to please by every decent, gentle, unaffected attraction, we are soothed, we are subdued, we yield ourselves your willing captives. But if at any time by a forward appearance you betray a confidence in your charms, and by throwing them out upon us all at once you seem resolved, as it were, to force our admiration, the human imagination hates to be confined. We are never highly delighted where something is not left us to fancy.
In other words, leave something to the imagination, which we have now unlocked, and I hate that phrase. Ew.
correct. Yeah, I hate that phrase too.
Mm-hmm.
Correct. And it's really quite a secular argument. The controlling thought behind it is, how do I look respectable and yet attractive enough to land and keep a husband?
Mm-hmm.
It's an argument that can be made with or without using the Bible to support it.
Absolutely. So that brings us back to the present. Purity culture is a hot topic these days. It's always having some sort of renaissance on some corner of the internet. And then I know this as a clinical counselor, people experience lasting damage from purity culture. I think it deserves some attention to talk about how purity culture actually gets modesty wrong.
I think the best way to understand purity culture is to see it in marketplace terms. Fundamentally, purity culture is about commodifying a woman's sexuality. Sexual integrity is seen as being transactional rather than relational, which is the way that it should be seen. And virginity is idealized because it symbolizes that a woman's body has been, quote, preserved for one consumer. And I know that sounds really dramatic and like I'm exaggerating until you think about the fact that my generation, millennials, grew up sitting in youth group classes being told that compromised sexual integrity is like a licked cupcake or a chewed up piece of gum. The message is pretty clear in those kinds of metaphors. If you wouldn't want to consume a chewed up piece of gum, you shouldn't expect a man to want to marry you if you've already given yourself away to someone else. In purity culture, modesty is a way to advertise to potential marriage partners that a woman's virginity is intact and that increases her value on the sexual marketplace.
And girls are given this message at a very alarmingly early age. The Princess and the Kiss, the story of God's gift of purity, is a picture book written for girls aged 5 to 13. Here's the description. A loving king and queen present their daughter with a gift from God, her first kiss, to keep or to give away. As various suitors compete for the princess's attention, the wise girl waits for the man who is worthy of her precious gift. So, like, let's be real here. The kiss is virginity. That's what it is. It's just a metaphor for virginity, right? So instead of teaching elementary age girls about privacy, boundaries, safety, it's setting girls up to think of their sexuality in terms of its future value to other people and how to invest it for maximum profit.
Yeah, it's gross. I don't love it. I I don't think that sex and the marketplace belong together. But at least in that example, the girl or woman has some agency in that story over how she manages her sexuality. So it's not great, but at least there's that. Bodhi Baucham says, and I quote,
Mm.
The father is the one who is responsible for protecting his daughter's virginity. In What He Must Be If He Wants to Marry My Daughter, he writes this: a patriarch must protect his daughter from male predators, so she will marry as a virgin, thus bringing honor to his name and purity to her husband.
Gross. Or you have the purity ball phenomenon. Girls, fathers, they dress in formal clothes, stand in front of witnesses, and recite vows. It's intentionally mimicking a wedding ceremony. That's gross and weird. Does anyone else see the incestuous vibes going on here? Because I'm seeing them. And then the daughter is promising her father to remain pure, and the father commits to keeping her a virgin until her wedding night. This is not normal, healthy father daughter behavior.
No, not at all. And the ironic thing there is, back in that quote, Bodhi Bakum is concerned about
Hmm.
predators, but
Hmm.
purity culture really sets you up to allow predatory people to violate your boundaries. And we've
Absolutely.
seen that with Bill Gothard, who used the IBLP modesty codes to groom his victims, to get them used to the idea that it's normal to have somebody control your appearance, control
Yeah.
your body. And then he would use the modesty code again after victimizing them to get his victims to accept blame for their own abuse.
We've unlocked another use of the Cartman drama triangle right there. A phrase you hear a lot whenever people bring up purity culture is don't throw the baby away with the bathwater. So, like, just for the sake of argument, let's say that people like Bill Gothard, they're just the bad apples, which also that phrase doesn't mean that like you can throw one bad apple away, it means that it spoils the whole thing. But like, I digress. Let's say that he's just one bad apple and he doesn't represent the whole purity culture, whole purity movement thing. So we have to ask, is there anything that is worth saving out of purity culture?
Purity culture just is a massive, massive failure at teaching young women about the importance of privacy and boundaries
Mm.
and what biblical sexual purity is all about. And you can see this in even less extreme examples. The Duggar family was very strict about modesty with their girls, but the Duggars opened up their lives and invited TV cameras into their home to film their minor children for the entire world to watch. And
Mhm.
that left their children without a firm grip on the difference between private and public. In her book, Counting the Cost, Jill Duggar writes that she didn't even feel the freedom to say no when the network wanted to film her giving birth, which is of such an intimate, private moment of life.
Yeah.
And it's a pattern that is all too consistent because the Duggars aren't the only ones who did this. There were all of these rip-off shows like Bringing Up Bates, which was another family with 19 kids that had a reality show about them, and all of their kids were dressed modestly, and yet they were all on TV from a very early age. You had Meet the Plaths, very similar kind of family, 8 kids, super modest, but they had no boundaries about privacy, and the parents did not understand that it's your job to protect your children's privacy, which would include not putting them on TV.
Absolutely. And it's such a concern because exhibitionism is a part of online trad wife purity culture. That's one of the essences of the whole entire scene right now. So when these young women grow up without a lot of education or professional opportunities, they want to be at home. So they turn on a camera and they open up their private lives and their kids' lives to public view. And they've been taught to cover themselves so men don't stumble or to protect their value on the sexual marketplace. But they've never been taught that their privacy matters or that they have a responsibility to protect their minor children's privacy.
Hmm. And another problem that I have observed with young women who have been steeped in purity culture is that when they get married, they do not understand that their married sex life should be private.
Right.
There is a YouTube channel called Girl Defined, which has two young women, Bethany Baird and Kristen Clark, their sisters. And when they first got started, they were part of the new wave of purity culture. And their early material has a heavy emphasis on modesty. Later on, they start to kind of deconstruct that. And part of their partial deconstruction is that Bethany starts talking about sex a lot and starts talking about hers and her husband's sex life a lot in more detail than I'm comfortable with hearing, and definitely more detail than her husband seemed to be comfortable with her sharing.
Mhm. It's very hypersexual. The mock marriages between fathers and daughters, that's hypersexual. That's sexualizing children. Bethany's going from modesty, which it isn't, to voyeuristic, letting us voyeur on her marriage, and she's exhibitionistic, even if it's just with her words. That's putting too much sexuality into the conversation that, like you said, Rachel, you don't want to hear. We don't want to hear about that. We don't need to hear about that. So when you hear people talk about purity culture, they think, okay, all these books are bad. And I get that. People think, what am I supposed to read then? Or what am I supposed to give my kids to read if I want to give them a biblical view of sex and modesty?
Have I got a book for you? It is called The Song of Songs, and you will find it in your Bible in between
Mm,
Ecclesiastes and Isaiah.
mm,
The Song of Songs is a beautiful, sometimes misunderstood book that follows the romance of a young man and a young woman during the reign of Solomon. We don't know for sure if it's supposed to be taken as history or whether it's just a parable that is portraying the romantic ideal. But either way, it's this entire book that is dealing with these issues. It's dealing with human beings' sexual nature. It's from falling in love to growing old together.
I love that. And we all have access to it. What does a Song of Songs teach us then about privacy and boundaries?
This book has so much imagery that reinforces the idea that women's sexual boundaries, in particular, should be respected
Mm,
both before and after the wedding, and that it is the woman's prerogative, not her male relatives, to set those boundaries. With relation to her sexuality, the woman is compared to a walled garden with a gate that locks from the inside.
mm,
She's compared to a fortified city with watchtowers. She's
mhm,
compared to an army with banners.
mm. On the one hand, these are really powerful images of female agency. But then on the other hand, aren't we right back to where we started with maidens in towers to protect their virginity?
There's a very crucial difference between what you see in the Song of Songs and the purity culture, commercialized, consumerist attitude that we've talked about. In purity culture, the woman's virginity is abstracted from her person. It's looked at as something that you can kind of isolate, and you could put it in a jar, put it on a shelf to preserve it for her husband later.
Mm,
There is no such abstraction in Song of Songs. In fact,
mm,
this attitude is specifically condemned.
mhm,
In chapter 8, the woman's male protectors, which in this case is her brothers, discuss how they're going to protect her virginity. And they say, if she is a wall, we will build upon her a battlement of silver. But if she is a door, we will enclose her with boards of silver. And at first, that might sound like, oh, that's sweet. They're being like protective older brothers. Until we remember that they are the ones who are going to profit from the dowry price that her husband would pay to the family. And
mhm.
they see her sexuality as simply a financial asset that they need to protect.
Right.
But she responds to them by saying, no, I am
Mm,
not a product that you can put behind bulletproof glass until the right customer comes along. I am the wall. I am the watchtowers. In other words, I am the keeper of my own body. And
mm,
it's this remarkable statement of female sexual agency, and it's not coming from me. It's not coming from Gloria Steinem or Betty Friedan. This is coming straight from God.
We've unlocked God. I love it.
Mhm.
I love it. So it's a total rejection of so many of the ideas that we've discussed today, such as a woman's virginity is a commodity that needs to be protected by the men in her family. Nope. A woman's right over her own body depends on what she's wearing. Nope. Sexual purity is something that's only available to women in certain socioeconomic classes. Also, nope.
And the lesson, I think, for anyone who is still recovering from purity culture, which I think is a lot of people in my generation and beyond, the lesson is that bodies, even our own bodies, are not something that can be bought and sold. They're not a marketplace commodity. You cannot put a price tag on the image of God.
Amen.
Thanks for being with us today. If you're enjoying this, you may be wrestling with other questions like, is hell just a prison and God holds the keys? Should Christians just accept climate disasters and the suffering of the masses? Should Christians just dominate the public square? Have we inherited the most accurate version of the Christian faith? We tackle issues like these head on. If you want bread and butter resources, check out our Bible studies and evangelism tools and spiritual formation material. If you want answers to tough questions, check out Reconstruction. If you want to live out Christian restorative justice, check out A Long Repentance, or Plantation Capitalism versus Jesus' Jubilee Economy, or Abortion Policy in the U.S. You can find our content on our website, our YouTube channel, and on our asynchronous learning platform, or join a live class with one of our instructors. We want to connect with you, whether you're a believer or a skeptic.